Our first speaker is Aodha de Brún. She is a barrister at law in Ireland and CEO and the founder of The Countess, which is an Irish campaigning organisation and activist organisation working in Ireland on the threat posed by gender ideology. How are you, Laoise, and how's the organisation going, and how's Ireland?
Well, third year as an organisation. We launched in September 2020. So we're coming up to our third birthday. And we had been Zooming in secret prior to that. But that's when we kind of launched into the public sphere with a thread that went viral all around the world. And it was about the women in Limerick's prison and in the women's wing of Limerick's prison. And I'm really pleased to say that I'm here today with good news that we have managed to bring forward legislation to exclude the Gender Recognition Act, the Gender Recognition Certificate, from applying to prisons. So essentially, I've drafted that myself personally, and what I've done with it is quite minimalist, I hope, and hopefully elegant, and hopefully it will get through or get as far as it can, at least as a messaging bill. But what we've done is we've said that it will no longer change whether a person is male or female when it comes to prisons. So therefore, we are limiting the scope of what a gender recognition certificate can do. And we intend to bring forward more and more legislation in order to chip away at a gender recognition certificate, because we at the Countess have long seen a gender recognition certificate really as an access all area pass for predators, transgressors, sports cheats, and perverts. And so even though this is not repealing the GRA, I have to say from the outset that, you know, of course I would love to repeal the GRA. I don't know an activist who wouldn't. This is simply as a matter of urgency and really as an emergency. We need to get those men out of the women's prison. So this is what we're doing. This is what we feel that we can achieve. And I'm really happy to say that, you know, we are, it's looking really good to get the 10 signatures that we need on our amendment bill to force a debate in Parliament in Ireland, which we've never had. No one has ever had to defend to their constituents the fact that men, dangerous sexual predators, are being placed in the female estate, in the reversal really of a 200-year-old policy. Because, you know, it was in 1723 that Elizabeth Fry and other reformers brought in legislation, advocated for legislation to separate the sexes in prison, explicitly to protect female prisoners from male prisoners. And so self-ID essentially reverses a 200-year-old policy. So we'll be asking our opponents to justify that and to justify the placing of these men in the women's wing. You know, recent revelations have shown the very egregious psychological impact on the women who, as we know, after all, you know, criminologists will often talk about the, you know, male violence being, in fact, the pathway to incarceration for female prisoners. So, you know, they've had a lifetime of male violence and abuse, and they are 95% of them are non-violent. They're in for petty crimes of addiction and coercive control, theft and non-violent crimes, and 85% of them are mothers. So we feel as an advocacy group, you know, essentially I feel as the founder that this is really the thing that made me say I have to do something. And it was the plight of those women that affected us to kind of an emotional level as an organisation. And that's why we have done what we've done. So I'm happy to start off with very good news.
I mean, that's fantastic. And can you tell us how that worked, the process, the drafting of the legislation, when you started doing that, and how you've been able to get in touch with politicians who are pushing it in?
Yes. Yeah, so I think what I'll try and explain is really the building blocks to get to that stage for any activist group. So I think, you know, we were lucky insofar as next door, you know, including yourselves, there's just such a great example of amazing organising amongst feminists. And so, you know, I was, from the very outset, I was kind of building peer-to-peer relationships with other leaders and getting advice. And one of the things that I decided to do from the outset was to really exercise a discipline around how we behaved online and in real life, to be extremely disciplined in our messaging, in our optics, in the information that we put out there. because this is, after all, an information war. But also, like, if you scope, as we did really hard at the beginning, and decide that you want to become a stakeholder group, that you never again want policies to be made and laws to be brought in that impact women and children in the way that Self-ID has done, and all the other accompanying suite of bills, which I'll explain about in a moment. But like, we want to be the ones with our feet under the table in the future. So in order to do that, there's a sort of number of steps that you have to go through in order to see. We're kind of ranted online. We don't talk about personality. Is immense. You know, we do all the consultations, and we do them to a degree of excellence. And even in terms of our content on social media, I see this very much as an information war. So I think that it's important to be putting out really good fact-checked content all the time. And we do that across 6 different social media platforms now. And I run it like a newsroom. I'm a former broadcast journalist. So nothing we ever put out will ever go out that we can't stand up ourselves. And in that regard, then I think we've built the trust of policymakers, because even when they say nothing and you're out in the cold and you're, you know, the outsiders and the pariahs, and you're, as we were smeared as, one TD infamously called us a fringe group of far-right transphobes from the floor of our parliament, so abusing his absolute privilege. But the thing is, we've just kept going. We've kept the work ethic and the output. And I think that's what gets noticed, and all the consultations. And then you think, gosh, the consultations are such hard work, and you scramble, and we're all just volunteers, and lots of us are mothers, and we're juggling households and jobs and caring responsibilities. But we've always managed to keep that level of work ethic and output going. And then eventually I think it percolates up. And so what happened was, you know, we ran a poll 2 years ago. And I'm always keeping an eye out for kind of who starts to follow us, you know, on the Twitter handle. And then I noticed the senator had followed us, and I was just jumped at the chance to sort of reach out to her and meet her for a coffee. And then we started working quite closely with her, and we started writing speeches for her. And then through her, other senators. And then, you know, gradually, then I had a meeting with a TD, 1 or 2 TDs. And one of them, I just pitched to him and just said, you know, we need to amend the Gender Recognition Act. And also, I have to say, sometimes with this game, you make your own luck, as in your timing can turn out to be impeccable, but it's because you've been slugging away so hard for so long. And what happened was, because of Nicola Sturgeon being unable in that jurisdiction in Scotland to defend that policy when, you know, a rapist was sent to a female jail in Scotland, and because she sort of dissembled in the media and then ultimately had to resign because of her inability to defend the indefensible, I just spotted my chance, and I started kind of messaging the TTs that I now had met by this stage and had a relationship with, and saying, you know, our time is now. So it's about being a bit brass-necked, I think, but also having the discipline and the work ethic to get you there, to get you the access. And I have to say, it's always evolving. We're always learning. You know, we're not seasoned campaigners in the Countess. I have no background in this. And so what I have found is that I'm now learning, you know, as well, that with this game, when you finally get to a stage where you want to be, where you're going in, you're having meetings, you're in from the cold, you know, and you've got the ear of elected representatives, of TDs, or, you know, in our country, or MPs they'd be called in the UK. So what happens then is you realize that even though you have the access, you're in a power relation, insofar as, you know, once you hand over your idea, it's their idea to run with, because they are fitting it into their own agenda, and they have their own relationships with their colleagues inside. But what they have, which you do not have, is they are inside the chamber. They're inside the chamber, and you're on the outside. And actually, it can be sort of a hard pill to swallow sometimes, and you have to get on with it, because you have more expertise than them. You know, your matter, your cause is only one of, you know, so many on their plate. And so it's really about that sort of nimble, deft and intuitive, and I guess having the emotional intelligence to quickly learn on your feet that that's the case, you know, and not be triggered, because it can be triggering, because you're like, this is your baby, and this might be a culmination of 3 years work. So I think they're the key things to build up that credibility and reputation for excellence and for discipline. And then once you build those relationships, to remember to remind yourself that, you know, they're the ones inside the chamber, and you're not. But Yeah, I mean, we are at a very much a tipping point in Ireland, and I think because of our work on the ground, the genie's out of the bottle, and Irish people are talking about this in real life. And once that happens with gender ideology, you know, as we all know, it's like a house of cards. It has no intellectual, theoretical heart. Like, it doesn't stack up, any of it. So I can tell you for a fact that, like, parents in Ireland do not want their teenage daughter running the gauntlet in a mixed sex school toilet or elsewhere. They don't want their daughter tackled in a football field by a boy. And so there is growing disquiet and even outrage, I would say, on the ground in Ireland.
And so it's interesting because you're really sort of focusing on legislation and building that reputation, getting really good relationships, and also you being a lawyer and being able to draft legislation that can be used by members of parliament to make amendments. That really seems to work. But you've also got this getting the word out big time with these 6, can you tell us, 6 media platforms? Can you tell us which platforms they are and how you manage to keep on top of all of that? How, like, do you have a press team, or what happens? Is it hard work?
Oh, if only, if only we had like a paid media manager, you know, we definitely would have broken through the kind of glass ceiling, and we'd be probably on the cover of the Irish Times, or, you know, on RTÉ News once a week. But alas, no. We've tried to box really clever. Like, in terms of radio and TV, we've done one TV show. Our spokeswoman in sport did it. She was absolutely excellent. It was an absolute bear pit. They set loads of traps for her. She kept it cool. I had a little chat with her beforehand, and I was like, sometimes if it's a bear pit, you know, I didn't want to put her off either, but I was like, your audience is the people at home listening. It's not really the presenter. It's not really the panelists. If it's incredibly adversarial like that, it's keeping your cool and your calm and getting your message out. So I would sort of, I suppose, coach people a bit like that. We have a few spokeswomen now. I want to see more. But what we did, which has worked really well for us, is we've sort of tried to we don't ignore them, but the woke mainstream media are much harder to crack than the regional, local radio stations in Ireland. And in Ireland, just the way the market is in terms of radio, they have huge listenerships. And so they love us, you know, and we get a lot of coverage that way, and we're getting the message out that way. And in terms of social media, you know, social media was also always how we did it first. So we launched on Twitter. I was running Twitter on my own initially, and now we have another woman, Barbara Jane, who does it with me, and then a few others will step up. But increasingly, because of the structure internally of the organization, we have kind of silos of expertise. So we have 8 pillars of concern, because when we scoped early on, we scoped very, very hard, and I was really keen to do that. And it's also really just enjoyable creative process, I have to say, when you're building an organization. But we identified like 8 pillars where we see, you know, the interfaces. So where sex matters. So obviously things like prison, sport, the transitioning of young people, schools and safeguarding, the lesbian erasure, and so like each of those will have a working group with a lead, and because they're like mini think tanks, they develop really good expertise in their own field. So increasingly I'll get them each to write a thread for the handle, and I think once you develop a good following in your handle, you need to keep that up all the time. People expect it. They want your commentary and analysis of all gender critical events. And also we comment with authority. I've always been very clear in this. We comment on male violence against women and girls, and we'll comment on porn, and we will expand in the future to doing more work around porn. But for now, we just don't have the bandwidth, but we intend to. But like we recently launched on TikTok, we're getting huge following on Instagram, and they're all different because they've all got different demographics. You know, Twitter is obviously the people who are into politics. It's like a newsletter, but then Instagram is very visual, and we get like, it's kind of, I feel like Instagram is often you know, new mums who've got a few seconds, and we really use it actually as a kind of radicalizing tool insofar as we really try and raise consciousness, and you can do that with you know, visually. And then Facebook is more, everyone's based in Ireland. It's more gentle space than Twitter, obviously. And people want to have a nice chat about the issues, but it's very much a community. And then obviously, the YouTube channel, everything we do, we put in our channel. We are going to relaunch our station soon again. and create our own content. But because we're quite busy with media now, we just put all that up there and brand it. And we get a lot of nice comments from people saying, "Oh, thank you." And so we've sort of made this work for us, even though we have been really, that we have been working within a media blackout, let's say. But despite that, we've used social media to our advantage and really cultivated different communities on all the different platforms. And and they are very different, and you get a feel for it after a while. And it's such a useful tool, I think, for activism, to get our message out. Like, for example, recently I made a speech outside the Dáil, which is our parliament, against the hate crime legislation, which is about to come in. And I have to tell, like, everyone watching, Ireland's going to bring in the most oppressive, authoritarian hate speech legislation in all of Europe. I mean, it's shocking what they're going to do. So within 48 hours, we were able to get together enough people to have a rally. I made a speech, and then we pumped that out over all our platforms. So even if you didn't get to be there on the day, like, you can feel part of it, and you can, learn what we're trying to say and learn about, through our advocacy, what's happening, because you certainly won't read about it, in the papers of record in Ireland, or learn about it in the mainstream media, because this is one of the issues I think we all face with trans orthodoxy. Like, essentially, I view the media as one of the pillars of this, as in they have helped it proliferate, because they have only ever kind of they haven't questioned the official narrative, and in fact they've just kind of bolstered it all this time. We've had a very famous columnist in Ireland liken us to Putin. And that's hate speech, but we made a complaint. It just went nowhere. So we've just tried to work outside those sort of systems, I suppose. But in terms of hate speech, just briefly to give you an outline of how bad it is. So it's sort of, it's kind of buckle up, because it's really bad. So essentially there's going to be two of the main pillars of any liberal democracy will be completely trampled on. The first being presumption of innocence under a criminal charge, and the second being freedom of expression. And essentially it will no longer be up to the state to prove that you are guilty. It'll be up to you to prove that you are innocent. So that's one extraordinary change. I mean, that's very unusual. There's only tiny few areas of law, like maybe fraud or sexual abuse images, where that's the case, where there's a sort of procedure. Normally in Ireland, like a certain of our police highly regulated like that under statute. But in this instance, any member of An Garda Síochána, which is our national police force, can just go to your property and they can demand all your passwords for all your devices, and they can seize all your devices. But one of the most extraordinary things about this legislation is that there's no definition for hate at all. So, and that's on purpose. And their stated goal as legislators, they've said this explicitly, is to get more prosecutions. And they're sort of saying essentially that, in order to do that, they won't define hate. So you could be hauled before the police and not know what you've done wrong, what you've said wrong. Also, there's no need to actually incite hatred. So you could have images or a poster in your house or an image on your phone that you don't send or share, but just possession is enough. So that's almost like pre-crime or pre-thought crime. And then one of our big issues as a campaigning group, a gender critical campaigning group, is that certain groups of society are being afforded protected status, and one of them is trans-identified people. Now, we should all view the debate around the conflict of rights as a bona fides debate that we all need to have in society. And I think it's no coincidence that it's just because of our work and other groups on the ground in Ireland that we're finally having this debate the way we should be, out in the open. That suddenly this has been brought in to essentially, I think, enforce the ideology on the culture. I mean, I don't even think that's any kind of conspiracy. I think it's pretty obvious, because trans-identified people will have afforded, they'll be afforded protected status. Well, what that means is that one of them can say that, what I'm saying is hate speech, and that's enough, because the test is subjective. It's their perceived sense of hate, of my speech being hateful.
Yeah. One of the things that we've heard about from Spain, but also from the European Union, is it's going across Europe, that organizations and media companies that allow this sort of thing, our ideas on their platform, can be fined hundreds of thousands of pounds for not clamping down on it. And that's incredibly chilling as well, because it means that the 6 platforms that you're promoting the ideas on could get shut down. And do you think that's part of it as well, that they're going to make it punishable, so the companies themselves will decide it's not worth a risk? Or how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is very worrying, and I like, it's almost like this sounds really I honestly don't know how to play out. Like, but all we can say is, when we look at other jurisdictions like England and Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Norway, ordinary men and women have had a knock on the door and have been hauled before the police and have been arrested and charged. Now, it seems really hard to get a conviction, and no wonder. I mean, the whole thing is just really a dog's dinner in terms of drafting. But I don't think that's the point, really. I think you're quite right. I think it's just to have a chilling effect on the debate, so that people, are afraid to even say it in the first place, afraid to put that tweet out, afraid to say it. And like, then people will just self-censor, which is such a pity, because, we are just at a stage in Ireland in particular where we've just turned that corner. We did a Red C poll 2 years ago, and like, it was unequivocal that, and it was very heartening for us, because we were still in that stage where, we were lambasted and smeared all the time as bigots and transphobes and TERFs, by public representatives as well, but the poll results were so heartening, because it just showed very clearly, like all these polls do anywhere in the world, that our views, that a man can never become a woman can't become a man, no child is born in the wrong body, it's impossible to change sex. These are mainstream, majority held views. So, and also, and I would love to do the poll again, because I'd say our figures would be much better even than they were, because 2 years ago, this was only trickling into the consciousness in Ireland. But, even then, only 17% of people in Ireland agreed with the falsification of birth certs without full genital surgery, which is effectively what we have. It's full self-ID, obviously, or you have a revised birth cert, it's called, and you don't, in Ireland, you don't need to transition in any way. You don't need to even to intend to transition. There's nothing you need to do. Just fill out a form. By its very essence, there is no gatekeeping in with self-ID, and that's what we have in Ireland. But fewer than 1 in 5 people in Ireland supported that 2 years ago. So hate crime legislation is there to enforce this ideology, which is deeply unpopular, onto the public. And I see it as kind of a part of a jigsaw or a suite of bills that happens. So when activists get in self-ID, as they did in Ireland 8 years ago now, it's only the beginning, actually. When you look back, we can see now that it was really just a flag in the sand, and then there's been a really aggressive forward march since then. What we've seen now is that, at the time, like, activists would say things like, "Oh, we just need this one small bit of admin, this piece of paper to be who we really are, to live our true selves, live our true lives." And then, but also we were kind of told it's also the new forefront and paradigm of international human rights law, and it doesn't impact anyone else in society. But it came in Ireland. But what we know now is, and I see this as kind of, it's become part of a kind of a wider ecosystem of full, complete institutional and cultural public sector capture, including schools, including government. And what happens then is they start to pump out other pieces of legislation which copper fasten self-ID and the idea of gender ideology, trans ideology onto the culture. And they do that by essentially making dissent unlawful across all sectors. So, for example, anti-conversion therapies bill means that a therapist can no longer do their job properly when they're presented with a gender distressed or questioning child. They have to affirm that. Hate crime obviously makes any normal debate or statement of material reality around biological sex hate speech, because it's as perceived by the trans-identified person. And also in Ireland and elsewhere, they've immediately started to push to expand self-ID down to children, down to 16-year-olds, with or without parental consent. And also, which happened obviously in America under Biden, under his first 100 days, the idea that we must collapse the gender ground in our equality legislation. So for me, that's like second level self-ID, because in Ireland currently you have to fill out a form. Now, no questions will be asked. You could be on remand for rape in Ireland, but you still get you still have to fill out a form and you get your GRC. But if the gender ground is collapsed, as they're trying to do in Ireland, well, what it would mean is that you can just on a whim identify into that female-only space. You know, we saw that in parts of Australia and Canada where they inserted into their domestic human rights instruments. But in Ireland, what they're trying to do is collapse the gender ground, which is what Biden did in his executive order, which means that gender no longer means biological sex. It means it's expanded to include gender identity and expression, which renders it meaningless because it no longer means that a service provider can discriminate on the basis of sex with regard to toilets or intimate spaces. And then you end up in a position where Darren Moranger is walking into the girls and women's area of the wee spa in downtown LA. But we're already seeing those impacts in Ireland, because I see self-ID as having a very dark and diffuse impact on society. It's not just the technical impact of the law, it's also the paradigm shift, because there's such cultural capture that lobbyists, what happens is service providers, including schools and shops and things, they kind of go way beyond what the lobbyists are even asking them to do. And what they're asking them to do is, allow that boy who says he's a girl into the girls' toilets. But what they do is they just, they basically get rid of the girls' toilets altogether and have mixed sex toilets or changing rooms. So in Ireland, there's a store called Penny's, which is really famous with, really popular with younger girls, like 12 and 13 and 14-year-old girls. And, men, they don't have girls' changing rooms anymore. And men are putting their phones underneath the curtains and recording that image and putting it up on Pornhub.